Our story begins when his father slapped his girlfriend's backside right in front of the class. Instead of fighting, Marcus simply turned and walked away, even as she called him a coward. He just smiled. This manipulative girl clearly thought they were still living in his past life. In that previous life, he had recklessly rushed in to beat up the class bully, only to have the girl tell everyone Marcus was the aggressor. She even teamed up with the bully to frame him before the teacher, resulting in a disciplinary record that cost him his chance at the college entrance exams. The most absurd part? After graduation, she actually started dating that same bully and eventually married him. But now that Marcus has been reborn, there is no way he's going to ruin his reputation and his entire future for her sake again. We find him now in the teacher's office, listening to their blatant lies and finding the whole situation almost comical. In his last life, he had tried so hard to argue his innocence, only to fail every time. Back then, he didn't understand why the teacher wouldn't believe him, but later, he realized that this entire questioning was just a formality from the very start. The bully, Leo, was the son of the dean, and the homeroom teacher knew exactly which side his bread was buttered on. No amount of explaining would help Marcus. The other side was never going to be punished. To make matters worse, his girlfriend, Sarah, refused to stand by him. Once the teacher, Mr. Miller, got the truth he wanted from Sarah, he nodded dismissively and told the two of them they could leave. It was a rigged game, and Marcus knew it. Mr. Miller then turned to Marcus with a look of disappointment, asking how a student with such decent grades could drop the ball at such a critical moment. He even suggested that if Marcus liked Sarah so much, he should have waited until after graduation to pursue her. He lectured Marcus on how violence is never the answer and informed him that his punishment was already set in stone. He was to write a 1,500-word self-reflection and face a school-wide public reprimand, with only 100 days left until the big exam. The teacher warned him not to let such things ruin his life. But Marcus, with a face devoid of any emotion, simply replied that he refused. Mr. Miller's eyes widened in shock, his temper flaring as he demanded to know what Marcus meant by refusing. He shouted that Marcus didn't realize the gravity of his mistake, claiming that the other parents were being generous by not pressing charges. He told Marcus that whether he wrote the reflection or not, the punishment was happening, and if he wouldn't admit fault, his parents would be called. At that moment, Marcus remained unfazed as the teacher opened the student records on his computer. He found Marcus's mother's phone number and dialed it immediately. To be perfectly honest, Marcus didn't care about the threat at all anymore. Compared to the grievances he endured in his past life, where he even failed his exams and truly let his parents down, this was nothing. He told himself that nothing would block his path this time. He wasn't going to apologize for something he didn't do. He looked the teacher in the eye and stated that he was not in the wrong, and that deep down, the teacher knew exactly what the truth was. He told him to issue whatever punishment he liked, then turned and walked right out of the office, which, naturally, was quite the bold move. What a joke. As a man who has lived a whole life already, he wasn't about to be intimidated by a high school teacher. Since he had been reborn into his senior year, he vowed never to bow his head to a lie again. He remembered the sting of his previous failure, and he was determined to take back every bit of glory that belonged to him. When he returned to the classroom, the place was buzzing with excitement. His close friends crowded around, asking for the verdict, and Marcus casually told them the school wanted a public apology. He informed them that he had told the teacher he wouldn't write a single word. He sat down and pulled out his books, ready to focus on his studies. His friend, Jake, gave him a huge thumbs up, amazed by his defiance, and asked what the teacher's next move was. Marcus replied with total indifference that the teacher was calling his parents. Hearing this, Sarah suddenly became anxious. She hurried over and pulled Marcus out into the hallway, trying to persuade him to just follow the teacher's orders before things got out of hand. She apologized for lying, claiming she didn't want to do it, but argued that it was better for only one of them to be punished rather than both. She even had the nerve to ask if he would really be happier if she got in trouble too, putting on a pitiful, pleading act. She hoped to convince him to take the fall for everyone, just like he did in his previous life when he was a total fool for her. But Marcus wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. He asked her why she was helping Leo if she claimed not to like him. Sarah desperately explained that she wasn't helping him, she just didn't want things to get complicated. She even offered to write the reflection for him if he would just admit fault to the teacher to make the whole thing go away. It was a classic trap, but Marcus saw right through it. Does it really have to come to calling our parents? Sarah asked, clutching Marcus's arm with pleading eyes. She looked utterly pitiful as she begged him to help her, claiming she didn't want her parents to find out, and even offered him a reward. Marcus just smiled and asked what that reward might be. Sarah bit her lip and whispered that since he liked her so much, she would give him a chance to date her. Marcus nearly laughed out loud. He told her to save that opportunity for someone else before turning back toward the classroom. In his past life, he had been blind, but he wasn't about to stay that way. Besides, if he was going to pursue anyone, it would be his true first love, not a manipulative girl like her. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He remembered that at this very moment, that other girl was likely still being bullied at the school next door. Not long after, the teacher summoned him back to the office. We see Marcus looking at his mother, Elena, with a complicated mix of emotions. She was clearly blindsided, never expecting her son to be involved in a fight over a girl, especially since he had always been such a well-behaved, top-tier student. Mr. Miller told Marcus to explain himself to his mother directly. Elena sighed, pulling her son into a quiet corner of the office to ask what was really going on. Marcus leaned in and whispered the truth into her ear, holding nothing back. To prove his point, he pulled out his phone and showed her the text message Sarah had sent him earlier that day. His mother was visibly shaken, her hands trembling with anger once she realized her son had been framed. Elena turned to Mr. Miller, her voice sharp as she asked how a young girl could lie so boldly. She immediately held the phone out to the teacher, insisting that her son was telling the truth. She explained that Marcus didn't go there because of some social media post. He went because this girl specifically told him she was being harassed. Mr. Miller's eyes widened as he scrolled through the chat logs, clearly not expecting such physical evidence. However, he quickly hardened his expression. He gritted his teeth and admitted that while the lying was wrong, the fact remained that Marcus had hit someone. He pointed out that Leo was an athlete, and if his injuries affected his upcoming exams, it would be a disaster. Then, Mr. Miller turned back to Marcus to continue his lecture. He argued that regardless of the circumstances, violence is never acceptable and Marcus needed to reflect on his mistake. He claimed he would deal with Sarah's lies later, but insisted that Marcus was still in the wrong. Marcus just laughed, repeating the teacher's words back to him with pure irony. It was truly impressive how a teacher could ignore the facts so blatantly. Marcus asked if they were just going to pretend the truth didn't matter, suggesting that if he was being punished, then all three of them should be disciplined together. To be honest, he didn't care about the consequences anymore. Mr. Miller was fuming at this point, pointing at Marcus and telling Elena that her son had a terrible attitude and zero remorse. He declared that a 1,500-word reflection wasn't enough. Now it would be 3,000 words, along with a public reprimand before the entire school. He claimed Marcus showed no sign of regret, but Marcus simply smiled and countered by asking if the teacher was certain Leo would actually be punished. He looked Mr. Miller in the eye and asked if he truly felt he was fit to be a teacher. This caused the man to jump to his feet in a rage. He shouted that Marcus was now insulting his superiors and told Elena that he was done trying to handle this. He decided to take the matter straight to the dean's office. Marcus scoffed, asking what the point was, since everyone knew Leo was the dean's son. He pointed out the obvious. The dean would never let his own son suffer any real consequences. This statement caused a total uproar. Half an hour later, in the dean's office, Dean Lewis sat with a stony face, claiming he had already heard about their disrespectful behavior in the teacher's lounge. He told Elena that they weren't even discussing right or wrong anymore, but rather her son's unacceptable attitude toward his teachers. He claimed Mr. Miller was so stressed his heart was acting up. He then feigned offense at the idea that he would protect his son from justice. The dean claimed he would punish his own son just as harshly at home, but insisted that Marcus must apologize to the teacher and read his 3,000-word reflection to the school. He called the situation extreme and suggested that if Marcus couldn't change his ways, the school couldn't keep him. Upon hearing the threat of expulsion, Elena's heart sank. She frantically asked if the dean was serious about expelling her son during his senior year. Dean Lewis just sat there, complaining that a student who doesn't respect his teachers is a student they simply cannot teach. He claimed they were powerless to help him if he remained so stubborn. Elena tried to explain that her son was just a bit headstrong, but before she could finish her sentence, Marcus interrupted her with a calm, clear voice that shocked everyone in the room. He told his mother it was no big deal and that if they weren't welcome here, he would just transfer to the high school next door. Dean Lewis was nearly purple with rage, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus and telling Elena this was her son's very last chance. He gave them an ultimatum. Either Marcus writes the reflection and admits his mistakes, or he leaves the school for good. Marcus just smiled. He was more than happy to leave this biased place behind. When the news reached his class, his peers were stunned, wondering how he would handle the big exam now. Several of Marcus's close friends hurried over to persuade him otherwise, reminding him that the college entrance exam is a life-altering event. His homeroom teacher had just told him that if he wrote the 3,000-word reflection, things might change. The teacher suggested that the disciplinary action against Sarah could be reconsidered if he just cooperated. Sarah's friends chimed in, claiming the teacher wasn't even angry anymore until Marcus started arguing, and now Sarah was being punished too. They asked if he was happy now that Sarah was crying and her parents were being called in. One of them even asked if he was even a man, letting a girl cry like that. Suddenly, the room went silent as Vice Principal Miller coughed twice and called for Marcus to step outside. The other students watched with complex expressions as we see Marcus walking into the hallway for a private talk. He expected a civil discussion, but instead, he was met with a verbal assault, being told that even if a teacher wrongs him, he has no right to talk back. The vice principal asked if he thought his good grades made him special. He then barked that the school didn't need students like him and that if he didn't want to study, he should just leave. Marcus calmly replied, "Fine," which left the vice principal gasping for air in pure shock. To be honest, he had never encountered such a defiant student. In a fit of rage, the man told him to just drop out then. At that moment, Sarah's parents finally arrived, but instead of disciplining their daughter, they immediately began distancing her from the situation. Her mother pointed a finger at Marcus with a look of pure disdain. She called him a nobody and accused him of lying about her daughter, even suggesting he be transferred so he wouldn't harass Sarah anymore. Marcus's mother, Elena, was fuming and ready to snap back, but Marcus cut her off with a surprising declaration. He told his mother he was dropping out and that his grades would only improve once he was gone. Nearby, the physics teacher, Mrs. Gable, sighed, mentioning she had planned to recommend him for next month's physics competition. It was a massive opportunity. She explained that a high score could even earn him extra points on his college entrance exams. But since there was only one spot per class, it would have to go to someone else. Sarah's mother, showing a fair bit of nerve, asked if Sarah could take the spot instead. Mrs. Gable gave a strained, awkward smile and noted that Sarah's physics grades were, well, mediocre at best. 2 days later, Marcus walked into his homeroom teacher's office with his withdrawal papers. Mr. Miller couldn't help but criticize him for ruining his own life. The teacher claimed he had never seen a student like this, especially since he was planning to sign Marcus up for the chemistry competition as well. Marcus looked at him nonchalantly and said that if the teacher apologized now, he might consider staying. He even suggested that if he won the award, the teacher could put his own name on it. Mr. Miller's face turned dark as he immediately signed the papers and told Marcus to take them to the dean and then the principal. He just wanted him gone. A few moments later, Marcus arrived at the main office. The administrator looked up and asked, "Dropping out, are we?" Marcus greeted Principal Lewis and asked for a signature on his withdrawal form. The principal frowned as he read the reason for leaving. Conflict with the English teacher, unable to continue studies. It was a bold statement, to say the least. The principal remarked that he must be the student who talked back to the teachers, noting it was a shame for a top student to leave like this. However, he felt that a student who gets into fights and disrespects authority simply couldn't be kept around. Marcus's lips curled into a slight smile as a sudden idea struck him. He mentioned hearing that the school was applying for a provincial model school status and suggested that if they needed his help to secure it, the teachers would need to apologize to him first. Principal Lewis rolled his eyes, shocked by the sheer arrogance of a student making demands. He had never seen such a lack of respect, so he immediately signed the papers and approved the withdrawal. Marcus then headed back to the classroom to pack his things. His desk mate, Leo, sighed and lamented that his life was over because he'd have no one to copy homework from anymore. Marcus laughed and told him he should try actually learning for once. Leo just joked that he was learned out already. We learned that in his past life, Leo was one of Marcus's few true friends. They had even ended up at the same university after Marcus failed his exams. It was actually Leo who had eventually told him the truth about Sarah's many deceptions. We learned that Sarah and that jock, Ryan, started dating and announced their marriage shortly after graduation. Marcus had been the only fool to attend, a memory that seems absurdly hilarious now. Meanwhile, Leo glanced over at Sarah and whispered that her mother had been telling everyone in class to keep an eye on Marcus so he wouldn't harass her daughter anymore. Marcus simply laughed, noting it didn't matter since he was leaving. When the final bell rang, Marcus began packing his things to leave this school for good. As he reached the door, Sarah called out to him, hesitantly claiming she never intended to hurt him. She looked as though her conscience was finally pricking her now that he was actually dropping out. Marcus turned back, his face a mask of indifference, and told her that her lies had truly disappointed him. Sarah, playing the victim, began to cry, insisting she didn't do it on purpose. Looking at her, Marcus felt none of his old affection. He realized her explanations were just a cover for her character. He couldn't help but snap that she and Ryan deserved each other. He walked away, finally releasing a frustration he had carried for 2 lifetimes. In his past life, he had imagined saying those words 1,000 times, even at their wedding. To be honest, being reborn feels incredibly liberating. He no longer had to live a stifled life. Upon returning home, the first thing he did was open his computer and log into the school forum to find his popular web novel thread. He posted that due to personal reasons, he was dropping out and would have to pause his updates. Over the past few days, he had been writing this story just to see if he had any talent, but his transfer had come much faster than expected. Since he was leaving, there was no need to continue here. He posted a formal apology to his readers, and almost immediately, a flood of fans began begging him not to stop. Seeing the comments, he smiled to himself. It seemed he actually did have a bit of a gift for storytelling. By Monday, Marcus had successfully transferred to the city's second-ranked high school. While the facilities were similar to his old school, the graduation rates were slightly lower. As they drove, his father kept a stern face, grumbling about the trouble Marcus had caused and how lucky he was that this school accepted him. Soon they arrived, and because Marcus's grades were excellent, the paperwork was finished in no time. He was assigned to Class 4, the top science track, led by an English teacher named Ms. Turner. After the dean introduced Marcus and his impressive academic history to her, the administrator left, but Marcus had one small request. He asked to sit next to a girl named Maya. Ms. Turner was surprised and asked if he knew her. He claimed she was an old classmate, and with a smile, the teacher agreed as they walked to the room. They found the math teacher inside giving a quiz. Ms. Turner nodded politely and led Marcus to the front of the class. She smiled at the students and announced they had a new transfer student, inviting Marcus to introduce himself. Marcus stood tall and told the class his name was Marcus, claiming his grades were average but his character was excellent and that he never, ever started fights. Ms. Turner nearly laughed out loud at his bold irony. She told the class he would be joining them and pointed him toward the seat next to Maya. A quiet, bespectacled girl looked up briefly. This was actually Marcus's first time meeting her, and he could tell she was incredibly shy. She seemed like the type of girl who was invisible in class, and perhaps even a target for bullies. In any normal school setting, she would have no social presence at all. However, Marcus knew that after graduation, Maya's reputation would skyrocket. He walked over and settled into the desk beside her. The math teacher handed him a copy of the quiz as well, telling him to try it so they could go over it tomorrow. Marcus nodded politely. But the peace didn't last. As soon as the bell rang, Marcus became the main attraction, like an animal in a zoo. Students from the neighboring classes even crowded the hallway, pointing and whispering about the new guy. Word had traveled fast. They whispered that he was the kid who fought a star athlete, talked back to his teachers, and was forced to drop out of the top school in the city. A dramatic start, to say the very least. But because of the fight involving Sarah, Marcus still carried the reputation of a hopeless romantic. Just then, the physics rep, Eric, walked up to greet him, impressed that Marcus had the nerve to get expelled from the top school. A rather pretty girl followed close behind. Sophie laughed, telling Eric that Marcus had supposedly fought a star athlete, who happened to be a teacher's son, all over a school beauty. She then turned to Marcus, mentioning that she actually knew Sarah personally. We see Marcus look at his new classmate in surprise. He asked how she knew her, and Sophie explained they were elementary school classmates. Marcus curled his lip, realizing his fresh start was already compromised. He hadn't even warmed his seat before his past was exposed. Sophie blinked at him playfully. She suddenly asked if he wanted to give up on Sarah and tried dating her instead. The surrounding students burst into laughter, reminding her she already had a suitor named Justin. Sophie shot back that she never said yes to Justin, and besides, she had a soft spot for top students. She noted that a top 10 student from the city's best school would easily rank top 3 here. To be honest, she found him quite humorous, claiming his grades were average and that he never fought, despite his history. Sophie watched him with an expectant gaze. She even suggested she could pursue him, as he was exactly her type. Unlike Sarah, she claimed she'd be moved to tears if someone fought for her. Marcus studied Sophie carefully. For a high schooler, she was certainly a beauty who would only get more stunning with time. In a few years, she would surely be the envy of any college campus. However, a cold voice suddenly cut through the air, calling Marcus nothing but a pathetic simp who got expelled for a girl who didn't even like him. It was a harsh, unnecessary comment. Justin shot Marcus a warning look, telling him to stay away from Sophie before heading out to play basketball with his crew. In his past life, Marcus might have been intimidated by this typical tough guy act, but now, seeing such posturing only felt absurdly comical. To be perfectly honest, the cool guys from high school usually turn out to be quite ordinary once they graduate. Marcus didn't care about the threats. His focus was already shifting back to his quiet, adorable future billionaire seatmate. He decided to ignore the drama entirely. Leaning his head on the desk, he turned to Maya and asked tentatively if she happened to know who he was as well. It was a simple question, but it seemed to catch her off guard. Maya froze for a moment before slowly shaking her head. Marcus smiled, suggesting they start fresh with a proper introduction. Maya looked at the new transfer student nervously, her eyes darting toward the door where Justin had just exited. She quietly asked if he knew how to fight. When Marcus claimed he didn't and that the rumors were wrong, she told him to be careful. When he asked why, Maya admitted she was worried because Justin would likely try to pick a fight with him. Marcus realized she meant the boy who had just threatened him. Maya earnestly warned him that Justin was obsessed with Sophie. Marcus, however, remained unbothered, casually changing the subject by asking Maya if she had a boyfriend. The sudden question left Maya speechless and staring in disbelief. When she shook her head no, Marcus's eyes lit up as he boldly asked if she'd like to be with him. Terrified and blushing furiously, Maya stammered that she had a math problem to ask the teacher about. She grabbed a worksheet and bolted from the room. Given her shy nature, she had likely never been confessed to so directly, and Marcus realized he had probably scared her half to death. And yet, he found himself looking forward to this new life. It seemed life at this school was going to be very interesting indeed. Maya didn't return until the bell rang, and even then, she kept her head down, clutching her papers as she scurried back to her seat. She was clearly too shy to handle what had just happened. Soon, the English teacher, Ms. Turner, entered the room with a stern expression. She announced that she had heard people gossiping about the new student. She made it clear that regardless of his past, Marcus was now a member of their class. She warned them not to speak behind their classmates' backs before handing out reading comprehension worksheets for the day. It was clear Ms. Turner had heard the rumors and was stepping up to protect her new student from the vultures. As the lesson began, Marcus made a delightful discovery. His English level completely crushed that of a typical high schooler. Although he had struggled in his previous life, he had eventually passed high-level English exams in college. His vocabulary was on another level. Whether it was grammar, writing, or reading, he was far ahead of his peers. He breezed through the entire worksheet, missing only a single question. It was a far cry from the struggling student he had been in his first life. In his past life, Marcus had underperformed, scoring only 112 in English when he usually hit 125. But this time, he felt a surge of confidence that he could easily break 140. After all, he had two major advantages. First, he had spent years in college memorizing advanced vocabulary for exams. Second, he actually remembered the college entrance questions. Just then, Miss Turner, the English teacher, called for everyone's attention to check their answers. She asked those with 5 or fewer mistakes out of 25 questions to raise their hands. We see about 8 students out of 48 raise their hands. It seemed the level here wasn't that far behind the city's top school. When she asked for those with 4 or fewer mistakes, 3 hands dropped, leaving only 5. These were the class elites. To Marcus's surprise, Sophie, the girl who had just flirted with him, was among those still holding her hand up. It turned out her English was actually quite impressive. When the teacher narrowed it down to 3 mistakes, only 1 hand remained. Miss Turner smiled and asked Sophie exactly how many she had missed. Sophie proudly replied that she only got 2 wrong. Miss Turner nodded in approval, noting that the test was quite difficult since it was compiled from actual past entrance exams. Suddenly, she turned her curious gaze toward Marcus, asking how he had fared, assuming a top student like him would do well. Every eye in the room turned toward him, waiting for his answer. Deciding it was better to keep a low profile as a new transfer, Marcus casually claimed he hadn't performed well and had made quite a few mistakes. To be honest, he was just being modest. Miss Turner told him not to worry and suggested he ask his seatmate, Maya, for help since her English was excellent. Marcus's eyes lit up as he agreed enthusiastically. Maya, however, looked terrified, stammering that she wasn't very good at teaching others. Sophie immediately chimed in, offering to help since she was the English class rep. She gave Marcus a playful, charming wink. But Marcus just smiled and politely declined, insisting that having Maya teach him would be more than enough. At that moment, Justin leaned back in his chair and scoffed loudly. He mocked Marcus, saying that missing 5 questions was hardly the mark of a top student. He openly wondered if the prestige of the city's top school was just an exaggeration. Sophie rolled her eyes at Justin's obvious attempt to target the newcomer. She pointed out that Marcus might excel in other subjects even if English wasn't his strongest. Miss Turner stepped in to calm the class, reminding them that their school was just as capable as any other. She then announced an upcoming English-speaking competition with 3 slots available for the class. This particular contest was district-wide and required a vocabulary range far beyond the standard high school level. It was a challenge for the truly dedicated. There were certificates and even cash prizes for the winners, not to mention the honor it would bring the school. Hearing this, Marcus felt a spark of interest. He immediately raised his hand and declared that he wanted to sign up. Justin couldn't resist another jab, questioning how someone who couldn't even beat his own classmates expected to compete with the whole district. He argued it would be unfair to give Marcus a slot. Marcus simply smiled, asking Justin why he felt so targeted. Justin doubled down, claiming he just wanted the best students to represent the school. Ms. Turner decided they would see how many people signed up first. If there were more than 3, they would hold a small internal screening to decide. As the lesson ended, Ms. Turner walked over to Marcus's desk. She wanted to see his worksheet for herself to understand his actual level so she could help him improve. It was a kind gesture, though perhaps unnecessary in this case. Marcus handed it over, confidently telling her to make sure he was picked for the speaking competition because he was very strong. Ms. Turner gave a non-committal smile, but as she glanced down at his paper, she froze in complete disbelief. The entire worksheet was perfect, except for a single multiple-choice question. She looked at him, confused, asking why he said he did poorly when he only missed one. The classroom went silent as everyone stared at Marcus in shock. Marcus sighed with a look of pure sincerity, explaining that for him, missing even one question was an unacceptable failure. The class erupted in a frenzy of whispers. Even Sophie was impressed, realizing he truly was a top-tier scholar. Justin's face twitched as he glared at his own messy paper, muttering about Marcus being a show-off. Ms. Turner couldn't help but laugh at Marcus's dramatic standards. She told him he'd done a great job and encouraged him to keep it up. As Ms. Turner looked over the worksheet, her heart finally settled. The administration had described Marcus as a top-tier student, and though she briefly worried his English might be a weak point, it was now clear that he was exceptional. At the very least, his English was outstanding. But as Marcus tucked his paper away, he heard a girl behind him complaining about a web novel that had suddenly stopped updating, the very one Sophie had recommended from the other school's forum. A small crowd gathered around Sophie to discuss the hiatus, and even Maya couldn't help but pull out her phone to check the notification. Curious, Marcus asked if she read it too, and Maya, biting her lip, gave a shy, cautious nod. A student sitting in front of them, Justin's friend Leo, overheard and turned around to face the new transfer student. He asked Marcus if, coming from the city's top school, he happened to know who the mysterious author was. Marcus was genuinely surprised to find that everyone was reading it. Maya whispered that their teacher, Mr. Miller, had actually been the one to introduce it to the class a few days ago during a lecture. Leo explained that the teacher had mentioned a particularly interesting story on the city school's forum, and after checking it out, the whole class was hooked. It seemed Marcus's old school was full of hidden talents. It all made sense now. The sudden surge in readers was thanks to a teacher's recommendation. Marcus smiled to himself, thinking he should ask for Mr. Miller's opinion during the next class. If it was good enough, he might even try to get signed professionally. Suddenly, Sophie called out loudly, asking if Marcus knew the author personally. Every eye in the room fixed on him, assuming a top 10 student like him would surely be in the loop. Marcus simply smiled and said that yes, he knew him. The classroom erupted in excitement, with students claiming the story was good enough to be a TV show. Marcus played it cool, telling them it wasn't that big of a deal, but promised he would ask the author when the updates would resume. Facing this crowd of fans, he felt the true charm of being an author for the first time. He glanced at his quiet, wealthy seatmate, Maya, who was looking at him like a curious child, and promised to get the answers they wanted. The crowd eventually dispersed with a sigh of relief at the good news just as the bell rang. The next period was Chinese, and the teacher, Mr. Miller, walked into the room immediately asking where the new student was. Marcus raised his hand, and Mr. Miller nodded, noting that he remembered Marcus's name from the top rankings, though he pointed out that Chinese seemed to be his weakest subject. Marcus admitted that classical prose and reading comprehension were his struggles. In his past life, his Chinese score had been a modest 114, even when everything else went perfectly. As the lecture began, Marcus leaned over and whispered to Maya that her handwriting was beautiful, elegant, and refined, just like her. He even suggested she would look great without her glasses. Maya, having no experience with boys flirting, could only bite her lip and keep her head down, pretending she hadn't heard a word he said. Seeing her focused on her studies, Marcus didn't want to disturb her further. Instead, he pulled out his phone and began writing his next chapter. When the bell finally rang, Mr. Miller walked over and looked down at the phone in Marcus's hand. The teacher's expression darkened instantly when he realized Marcus had been on his phone the entire period. The surrounding students watched with bated breath, realizing the star transfer student had finally been caught red-handed. Marcus simply nodded, admitting he wasn't very fond of Chinese class. Mr. Miller, face grim, told him to step out into the hallway, leaving the classroom buzzing with whispers about what would happen next. Out in the corridor, Mr. Miller asked why he was wasting time when he knew Chinese was his weak point. Marcus smiled and confessed it wasn't actually a weakness. He just wanted permission to write his own material during class. Confused, Mr. Miller asked what he meant. Marcus handed over his phone, and as the teacher looked at the screen, he froze. He recognized the text immediately. It was the next part of the story he had been following. Mr. Miller stood there in total shock, realizing that the account logged in was indeed the author's. He took a sharp breath, completely blindsided by the fact that the student he was about to scold was the very writer he admired. His stern expression melted into a look of genuine admiration. After all, he truly enjoyed the story himself, or he wouldn't have shared it with the class. Mr. Miller chuckled, noting that while the writing was excellent, Marcus still had to attend his lessons. The college entrance exams were far too important to ignore, but Marcus quickly explained that his Chinese skills were actually quite strong. He promised to score above 140, urging the teacher to trust that he wouldn't gamble with his own future. Mr. Miller frowned, considering the proposal, and decided that unless Marcus could take first place in the upcoming four-school joint exam, he couldn't allow it. He clarified that he meant first in Chinese, not the overall total, which was a bold challenge. Marcus didn't even hesitate before agreeing to the deal. If he took the top spot in the school for Chinese, he'd be allowed to write during class. Mr. Miller asked if he was truly confident, and Marcus simply grinned, certain of his own success. We should note that this joint exam involved the city's 4 top high schools, all using the same test papers to measure their standing. Among them, the first high school and the city high school were the elite, while Marcus's new school sat further down the rankings. While these scores weren't the final word on the entrance exams, the rankings served as a vital reference for the student's potential. Historically, those who topped the joint exams were the primary candidates for the country's most prestigious universities. Before they finished, Mr. Miller curiously suggested that Marcus should consider entering the new concept writing competition. Marcus's eyes lit up, recognizing it as the prestigious national contest organized by the famous literary magazine. Mr. Miller nodded, mentioning that several students from the top school had already signed up for specialized coaching. Their own school leaders had initially decided to skip it due to the difficulty, feeling they had little chance of winning a national prize. However, the teacher felt Marcus had a real shot, prompting Marcus to ask if a win would help the school's reputation. Mr. Miller was surprised by the boy's insight, confirming that such an achievement would certainly put their school on the map. With the deal struck, Marcus officially signed up, leaving Mr. Miller laughing and looking forward to the exam results. As Marcus turned to leave, the teacher couldn't help but ask when the next chapter of the story would finally be posted. Marcus promised an update for the following day and returned to his seat, where he was immediately swarmed by curious classmates. Just as they began to pry, Mr. Miller stepped back into the room to announce a new rule for Friday's exam. To prevent any issues, the students would be shuffled into different classrooms rather than staying with their own peers. Mr. Miller looked directly at Marcus, asking if that was a problem, which left the rest of the class wondering what the exchange meant. Marcus simply nodded with a smile, and as soon as the teacher left, Sophie turned around to demand an explanation. Marcus shrugged it off, casually mentioning that he'd told the teacher not to worry about him as long as he took first place in the school. Sophie's eyes nearly popped out of her head at the mention of taking first place, and even Maya sat there in stunned silence. It was a bold claim, especially considering Marcus had just been asking for help with his Chinese studies moments before. Marcus laughed, telling them to keep it quiet since there was always a chance he might fail, then realized how hungry he was. He asked why they hadn't headed to the cafeteria yet, and Sophie explained they were waiting for him since he didn't have a meal card. He teased Maya about her kindness, causing her ears to turn bright red as she silently pulled her lunchbox from her desk. The afternoon proceeded with an endless barrage of practice papers, a perfectly ordinary, if exhausting, school day. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with a message from his friend Jacob, who was shocked to find out Marcus had transferred to the other school. It seemed a photo of Marcus had already been posted to the campus forums, sparking a wave of rumors about his move. Jacob mentioned that his ex-girlfriend Sarah's classmates were in that same building, and more importantly, the story Marcus had posted was blowing up. With only 4 chapters out, it was already the talk of the class, with everyone complaining about the lack of updates. While the general public didn't know the author's identity, Jacob suspected Sarah probably did. Furthermore, the principal was now asking around about the writer after a visiting provincial official had seen the story and praised it endlessly. The school even wanted to keep a copy in the library as a permanent collection, and Jacob wondered if Marcus should come forward. However, before any decision was made, Sarah had already taken it upon herself to visit the teacher's office. Sarah told her homeroom teacher, Mr. Miller, that she knew exactly who the author was. Mr. Miller smiled, noting that she had arrived at the perfect time, as he suspected the story on the school forum was written by one of their own students, especially since a visiting official had taken such a liking to it. The principal now wanted to use this momentum to start a literary club and have the students share their writing process. Mr. Miller asked if the author was indeed in their class, and after a moment of hesitation, Sarah slowly nodded. Mr. Miller beamed at her, asking for the name, but Sarah remained silent, torn because Marcus had already left the school. Suddenly, the vice principal, Mr. Harris, called to ask about the author's identity, and Mr. Miller confidently insisted that the writer was definitely one of his students. After hanging up, he realized Sarah still hadn't given him a name and turned back to her with an expectant gaze. Sarah began to stammer, looking quite uncomfortable as she whispered, asking if they could just drop the matter entirely. Mr. Miller laughed, asking why they would do that unless she was the one who wrote it, which caused Sarah to nervously wave her hands in denial. When she finally whispered the name Marcus, Mr. Miller froze in complete disbelief. He couldn't believe the forum story was written by Marcus, but Sarah kept her head down, explaining that the posting account definitely belonged to him. Mr. Miller's head was spinning. Marcus's grades had always been mediocre, and his essays were nothing special, so this made no sense. Sarah, feeling guilty, admitted she didn't know how he did it, but she had confirmed the account by checking their old chat logs. Mr. Miller rubbed his temples, feeling a massive headache coming on. He snapped at her, asking why she hadn't said it was Marcus before he spoke to the vice principal, especially since the boy was no longer at the school and he had already promised results. He worried about what to do if the education officials asked to meet the author. Sarah looked down dejectedly, apologizing and explaining that she was simply afraid to speak up since Marcus had already withdrawn from the school. Mr. Miller was beyond frustrated, mostly because he had already bragged in the teacher's group chat about the student being in his class. It was a total embarrassment to realize the person they wanted to honor was the same student he had argued with before he quit. Gritting his teeth, Mr. Miller decided that since Marcus wasn't updating anymore, they should just pretend they didn't know who the author was. He told Sarah to keep quiet about Marcus and promised to find an excuse for the school leadership. Sarah seemed like she wanted to protest but held her tongue. After taking a moment to compose himself, Mr. Miller called Vice Principal Harris back, claiming there had been a misunderstanding after speaking with the student. He lied, saying the student had actually plagiarized the story and there was no more content, which was why they were too embarrassed to come forward. After hanging up, Mr. Miller breathed a sigh of relief, but he knew he had to stop the rumors in class to be safe. He hurried to the classroom just as the English teacher was about to start the lesson. With a forced smile, Mr. Miller interrupted to tell the students to stop worrying about the forum story and focus on the upcoming four-school joint exam instead. He urged them to strive for excellence in their studies, trying his best to put the whole literary scandal behind them. However, just as he turned to leave, a student shouted that the story had been updated only 5 minutes ago. Mr. Miller felt a jolt of shock, as if he'd been struck by lightning, frozen by the news of the update. The classroom immediately erupted as students pulled out their phones to check the forum for themselves. Sure enough, the story that had been silent for days had just posted a brand new chapter, leaving Mr. Miller standing there in a daze. A storm of panic surged within him, and he instinctively roared at the class, demanding to know why they were on their phones during a lesson. He ordered them all to hand over their devices after class, leaving the students terrified and confused by his sudden outburst. Once Mr. Miller left, the students began whispering in a cold sweat, wondering why their teacher had snapped so violently. Sophie, however, seemed to suspect the truth. She glanced at Sarah's troubled expression and immediately sent Marcus a secret message. She filled him in on everything that had just happened. Meanwhile, back in his office, Mr. Miller rubbed his head in despair, wondering how to handle the fact that the plagiarized story he just dismissed had suddenly come back to life. If he admitted Marcus was the author, he'd be confessing to his own lies. Yet if the school leaders insisted on meeting the boy, he'd be trapped. In a sudden flash of inspiration, Mr. Miller grabbed his phone and called the dean, Mr. Lewis, to handle the fallout. He decided to claim that he was actually the one writing the story all along, but Mr. Lewis wasn't buying it, pointing out that his previous lie about plagiarism made this new update impossible to explain. Mr. Miller was told he was on his own now. Gritting his teeth, Mr. Miller threatened to reveal that the dean's own son had conspired to bully Marcus out of school, which brought an icy silence to the other end of the line. Mr. Lewis, his tone turning cold, finally asked what he wanted. Mr. Miller suggested they contact the forum moderator to delete Marcus's account entirely, claiming it was a distraction to the students' studies. Meanwhile, over at the second high school, students were already buzzing with excitement as they noticed the story had returned. Phones were being pulled out everywhere as the update went viral, and a student named Jake even ran up to Marcus, asking if he could get the author to set a fixed schedule. Just then, Sophie let out a gasp of shock. The post had vanished into thin air, leaving everyone in a state of total confusion. Marcus frowned, sensing something was wrong, and checked his account only to find that his entire thread had been wiped clean. It was clear that Mr. Miller had followed through on his threat to silence the story. After all, the teacher had just warned them not to discuss the matter further. We returned to the classroom, where the math teacher cleared his throat to announce the upcoming four-school joint exam, emphasizing that they would be swapping classrooms for the test. He began handing out practice papers, some of which were from previous years. The teacher explained he had personally curated the questions and sent the class rep to distribute them. But the lesson was interrupted when the literature teacher, Mr. Reed, appeared at the door and asked Marcus to step outside for a moment. The class watched with curiosity as Marcus followed him into the hallway, where Mr. Reed whispered a question about why the story had been deleted. Marcus just gave a casual shrug, noting that no one had bothered to notify him. Mr. Reed mentioned that officials from the Education Bureau had actually praised the writing, making the sudden deletion even more baffling. Marcus realized then that because he had left his old school, they were trying to bury his success. Mr. Reed suggested that Marcus should simply start posting on the second high school's forum instead, where he'd be safe from his old teachers. He even hinted that if Marcus won the upcoming writing competition, the story might actually become a book. After returning to class, the math teacher announced a 5-minute break. As Marcus stood up to head out, Sarah ran over with a mischievous grin, claiming she knew a secret, before leaning in to whisper that she knew he was the author. Marcus asked if Sophie had told her, but Sarah just smiled triumphantly. In response, Marcus whispered back that he was planning to restart the story on their new school's forum, which made her clap her hands in delight. Suddenly, Marcus noticed that his notebooks and the pen he had borrowed from Luna were missing. When he asked her if she had taken them back, Luna remained silent, blocking his hand when he tried to reach for them. Marcus couldn't help but chuckle, asking his wealthy little deskmate if she was actually jealous of his chat with Sarah. Luna just huffed, telling him to go find Sarah if they were such good friends, looking quite adorable in her frustration. To soothe her feelings, Marcus opened his phone and showed her his forum account. Luna's eyes widened in shock, and before she could shout, Marcus gently placed a finger over her lips to keep their secret safe. He then explained everything, how Sarah found out and the real reason behind the fight at his old school. By Wednesday, during PE class, the teacher ordered everyone to run 1,500 meters, and Marcus watched Luna's awkward pace. He realized that her introverted nature likely came from being teased by others in the past. In that moment, he felt as though he had discovered a hidden treasure, a sweet, wealthy girl that no one else truly understood or appreciated. He decided then and there that he would be the one to look after her from now on. He ran alongside her on the track, and though Luna looked down shyly in her usual self-conscious way, Marcus simply asked what she wanted to drink. He told her that she really didn't need to care about those who laughed at her. Luna cautiously lifted her head, though her lingering self-doubt was plain to see, and she timidly asked if he would laugh at her too as the rest of the class finished their run. Marcus, Luna, and Sarah stayed behind to rest, and he eventually asked the girls if they wanted to play badminton. They both shook their heads, preferring to just sit for a while, but as they rested, the rest of the students were stunned by what Marcus did next. It was clear that Luna and Sarah were the type of girls who had been unfairly labeled by their peers. They weren't unattractive by any means. They simply lacked that typical, outgoing feminine charm that the others valued. Marcus took a moment to repost his story on the second high school forum, even adding a fresh chapter. But when he looked up, he saw Luna and Sarah walking away with dark expressions, Luna even wiping away tears as she went. He immediately gave chase to find out what had happened, but a red-faced Luna only gave him a look of pure grievance before running toward the school building. Sarah bit her lip in a difficult spot and followed her, but not before turning back to Marcus. She shouted that this was all his fault. Confused, Marcus caught up and grabbed Sarah's arm, demanding to know why Luna was crying. Sarah sighed, glancing at a group of girls playing nearby, and explained that they had seen him buying the girls water. Sarah had mentioned the water was for Luna, which immediately caused the other girls to start jeering. They mocked the idea of Marcus pursuing someone like Luna, making cruel comments about his poor taste and comparing the pair to a delicate flower planted in manure. His lip twitched in disbelief as he asked who exactly had called him manure. Sarah whispered that they actually called him the flower in that scenario. Marcus let out a frustrated laugh and demanded to know who said it, to which she named a girl named Sophie. Sophie and another girl named Chloe had been gossiping about Marcus's supposedly poor taste. Marcus told Sarah to head upstairs while he went to demand an apology, walking straight toward the group of girls who were still playing nearby. As he approached, Chloe and the others seemed to realize why he was there. Chloe offered a sheepish, awkward smile, admitting they might have accidentally made Luna cry. Marcus took a deep breath and sternly told them they needed to apologize. Knowing they likely wouldn't say it to her face, he suggested that Chloe and Sophie write an apology note instead. Chloe was stunned, asking if she really had to do it, and she began to argue out of a sense of petty jealousy. Marcus didn't back down, snapping at her until Chloe was so startled she froze in place. Even the girls playing nearby stopped to stare, shocked by his sudden temper, as Chloe's eyes welled up and she slumped to the ground in tears. The sight of a crying girl caused a stir among the boys, and a student named Ryan came rushing over to ask if Marcus was bullying her. Chloe just shook her head, told Ryan it was none of his business, and stormed off after giving Marcus a final glare. Ryan pointed a finger at Marcus, warning him not to leave after school, and by that afternoon, the atmosphere in class was thick with whispers. During the final study session, Sarah quietly passed a note to Luna. The note explained that Marcus had made Chloe cry and that Ryan was planning to jump him after school. Luna's heart raced as she read the words, and she nervously showed the note to Marcus, her eyes filled with genuine concern for him. She bit her lip and whispered an apology, suggesting they tell a teacher, but Marcus firmly disagreed. He knew that involving the staff would only drag Luna into the center of the drama, and he refused to let her be targeted. He could easily imagine the fallout if the four of them were hauled into the office. Even if the teachers settled it, the school gossip would only get worse. Having lived through this once before, he knew that rumors could destroy a person's spirit. He certainly wasn't going to expose a sensitive girl like Luna to that kind of scrutiny. Luna looked at him with a mix of fear and sadness before picking up her pen and writing a few words on a scrap of paper to hand back to him. She offered to go and apologize to Chloe herself, hoping that would make Ryan and his friends back down and leave Marcus alone. Marcus let out a small, knowing smirk and passed a note back, jokingly asking his wealthy deskmate for a loan so he could hire some backup. To his absolute shock, he received a digital transfer 2 minutes later that was far larger than he expected. The balance on the screen was a staggering 286,000 yuan. Marcus was completely stunned. He had no idea his deskmate was a literal heiress. He asked if it was enough, and Luna simply asked if he needed her to get more from her mother, leaving him laughing in disbelief. This was beyond anything he had expected. Marcus quickly scrolled through his contacts, deciding his best bet was to message Mike. He told Mike that someone was planning to jump him after school and asked him to bring some backup to the front gates. He offered 300 per person just for showing up, plus 500 more if things got physical. Mike was floored, wondering if the students at Second High were really that tough. Marcus didn't hesitate to transfer 30,000 yuan up front, leaving Mike wondering if he was planning to hire an entire army. With the arrangements made, Marcus glanced over at Ryan, who was already glaring back at him. When the final bell rang, the entire class seemed to turn their heads toward the back of the room. Even Sophie, the class rep, couldn't help but walk over with a conflicted expression. She pulled him aside and whispered that he should stay inside, as Ryan had a group waiting for him outside the gates. Sophie shook her head in worry, apologizing and explaining that she had tried to talk Chloe down, but the girl was determined to cause trouble. She suggested Marcus should just apologize. She reminded him that people had been badly beaten over less in the past. Marcus just chuckled, asking if she was actually worried about him. He told her to focus on apologizing to Luna during the evening session, then turned and walked out of the classroom with a cool, effortless confidence. Seeing that she couldn't stop him, Sophie turned to Luna and pleaded with her to intervene. She begged Luna to tell Marcus not to go out the front gates, fearing he was about to get hurt. Sophie crouched by the desk, her voice trembling as she asked for help, but Luna simply shook her head. Luna looked at her with a steady gaze and said she trusted him. Sophie was nearly in tears, arguing that trust wouldn't win a fight against a mob. She admitted she shouldn't have gossiped and was only acting out of jealousy, but she truly didn't want to see Marcus get hurt. She begged Luna to talk some sense into him since they were so close. Luna hesitated for a moment before shaking her head again, quietly mentioning that Marcus had made his own preparations. Sophie was both anxious and angry, pacing around and wondering what they should do next. She grit her teeth, preparing to run to the teacher's office to report the situation, but Luna found a sudden burst of courage and stopped her. She insisted they couldn't go to the teachers. In that moment, the usually timid Luna looked remarkably serious. Normally, she wouldn't know how to handle such a crisis, but she felt a deep need to believe in Marcus. She knew that if the teachers got involved, all of Marcus's efforts to protect her would be for nothing. Sophie was frantic, asking if she had lost her mind and if she wanted Marcus to get expelled. Luna took a deep breath and calmly repeated that they had to trust him and keep the teachers out of it. Sophie stared at her, mouth agape, feeling as though she were in a dream. Meanwhile, near the school gates, a group of classmates were already gathered, whispering about the impending showdown. One student, who often hung out with Ryan, asked Marcus if he was really going out there. Marcus just smiled and asked where Ryan was. Apparently, the boy had gone to the teacher's office to ask about homework, which Marcus found quite amusing. It was a clever way to create an alibi, and a student named Leo laughed, praising Ryan's top student intelligence. Leo suggested Marcus should just bow his head and apologize to end the tension, even offering to mediate. Marcus, however, just kept his hand in his pocket and said nothing. He continued walking toward the exit, where several scooters and motorcycles were parked along the curb. 7 or 8 guys who looked like local thugs were standing around smoking. Leo patted Marcus on the shoulder, wished him luck with a smirk, and quickly made his exit. As soon as Leo left, the group of smokers turned their attention toward Marcus. They shared a knowing laugh, and a guy with dyed yellow hair stepped forward. He called out to Marcus, telling him to come over, causing the other departing students to scatter in fear. The yellow-haired youth blew a puff of smoke and draped an arm over Marcus's shoulder, asking if he was the new transfer student. Marcus raised an eyebrow, looking them over and realizing they were just local dropouts. They weren't much older than he was, despite their attempts to look intimidating. Seeing them on their beat-up scooters, trying to play the part of gangsters made Marcus let out a genuine laugh. He asked if Ryan was the one who had called them. The yellow-haired boy just shook his head and told Marcus they needed to have a little chat around the corner. To be honest, any normal high schooler would have been terrified by the tattoos, the smoke, and the fact that 2 of them were holding metal pipes. It was a scene designed to intimidate, but to someone who had lived a whole life and returned, it all felt a bit ridiculous. Marcus looked around and asked if this was really all of them, noting that he expected a much larger crowd. The yellow-haired leader scoffed, turning to his friends and mocking the big guy for thinking they weren't enough. The other thugs joined in, sneering and asking Marcus who he thought he was. "Who are you trying to impress?" The leader sneered, but his bravado vanished as Mike arrived with a massive crowd of men, swarming toward the station where the thugs were gathered. The sight of this small army terrified the students and parents nearby, while the school security guard, trembling with nerves, immediately pulled out his phone to call the school administration. The thugs Ryan had hired were utterly speechless as Mike looked them over, laughing at the fact that he'd brought so many men just to deal with a few high school dropouts. Mike recognized Marcus from the photo and chuckled, while Marcus admitted he hadn't expected such a small turnout from the opposition, especially since Ryan was hiding in the teacher's office. Marcus told Mike to handle it since everyone involved was from outside the school, and Mike happily agreed, telling Marcus to head home while his men surrounded the terrified gangsters. Within moments, dozens of men had seized the small-time thugs, dragging them off to a quiet corner to give them a much-needed lesson in humility. Back at the school, rumors began to fly instantly about a student being dragged away by a mysterious group. The dean, Mr. Miller, rushed out only to see the crowd disappearing around the corner, and he anxiously asked the security guard if any of their students had been hurt. The guard shook his head, noting that the student involved seemed to have left safely, which allowed Mr. Miller to breathe a sigh of relief before messaging all the teachers. He sent an urgent alert to the faculty group chat about the fight outside, instructing every homeroom teacher to check if any of their students were missing or injured. By the time evening study session began, Class 4 was in an absolute frenzy over a photo someone had snapped of Marcus being confronted by the yellow-haired thug. The students were stunned to realize Marcus was the one in control, having summoned a literal army of adults to back him up, instantly overshadowing Ryan's past reputation. Sophie sighed and passed a note to Ryan, who became so enraged after reading it that he slammed his books down, only to be summoned to the office for a reprimand. While Ryan was stuck writing a confession, someone in the classroom shouted that the famous web novel from their old school had just been posted to the local forum. The girls in class were buzzing with excitement, and Chloe turned to Luna with wide eyes, whispering about the author who had just transferred into their school. Chloe glanced at the empty seat next to Luna, and when Luna simply nodded in confirmation, Chloe blurted out Marcus's name, causing the entire room to erupt in shock. The students couldn't believe the top student was also a famous writer, and Sophie smiled, sharing a knowing look with Luna as the truth finally settled in. Suddenly, a girl named Sarah ran over to Sophie, terrified that Marcus might send his army after them, but Sophie assured her he wouldn't, though an apology was definitely in order. Sarah immediately began scribbling a letter of apology, and after the first bell, she nervously approached Luna to stammer out her regrets for the things she'd said. Sophie joined her, offering a sincere apology of her own and revealing that she had made a major decision, leaving both Sarah and Luna staring at her in surprise. Sophie proposed a fair competition to see who could win Marcus's heart, leaving Sarah standing there in stunned silence while Luna felt a strange, dizzying sensation of disbelief. The next day, we returned to the school where Marcus had become a local celebrity, with students whispering as he passed, though none quite dared to greet him yet. When Marcus ran into his classmate Leo in the cafeteria, Leo nervously swallowed hard, stammering an apology and claiming he barely even knew Ryan at all. Marcus found it quite amusing, reminding Leo that wasn't his tone yesterday, while Leo desperately tried to flatter him by praising his web novel's fantasy elements. Deep down, Marcus realized Leo was a bit of an eccentric character, so he simply ignored the chatter and headed back to the classroom to face his fans. He finally came clean to his classmates, admitting with a smile that he was indeed the author, before noticing a mysterious breakfast and milk waiting on his desk. After Jacob suggested the English class rep might have bought it, Luna returned to the room, and Marcus playfully swapped his breakfast for hers with a grin. Luna frowned in confusion, asking why he was doing this, but Marcus simply told her not to let the milk go to waste. He personally handed the milk to her, and after a moment of deep thought, Luna came to the hilarious conclusion that he was trying to avoid paying her back. Marcus laughed, assuring her that while he wasn't exactly a saint, he would never scam her, promising to repay his debt in due time. Luna looked quite distressed, explaining that was her entire savings, so Marcus offered to cover all her expenses for the month as a compromise. He insisted she use his digital payment card, setting a monthly allowance of $1,000 despite her protest that $600 was more than enough. He told her that learning how to spend money was an important skill, and after he set up the transfer, Luna could only nod in a daze. The moment of peace was broken when the homeroom teacher, Ms. Miller, summoned both Marcus and Ryan to the hallway while the class watched with bated breath. Marcus maintained a perfectly calm expression, jokingly telling the teacher there was no fight and that he and Ryan were actually the best of friends. Ryan was utterly speechless at the audacity of the claim, especially when Ms. Miller sarcastically suggested they should sit together in class then. Both boys immediately shouted no in unison, and Marcus quickly added that they'd probably just spend the whole time chatting and ruin their studies. Ms. Miller noted that neither boy looked injured, especially Ryan, who had spent the previous evening hiding in the math office, so she decided not to call their parents. She gave them a stern warning to stay out of trouble, and Marcus responded with a polite, knowing smile that suggested he understood perfectly. Before leaving, Marcus surprised her by asking to join the English-speaking competition, prompting Ms. Miller to send Ryan away so she could speak to Marcus alone. Ms. Miller asked if Ryan was bullying him and forcing him to keep quiet, so Marcus reported the school gate incident with the precision of a professional informant. Upon hearing this, Ms. Miller was momentarily stunned, realizing that their best friend's claim was a complete sham, but before leaving, Marcus even offered her some advice. He suggested she tell the school leaders that those thugs were just there for his cousin's birthday and happened to be passing by, a suggestion that actually made Ms. Miller laugh. Marcus smoothly followed up by telling her she had a beautiful smile, a bit of charm that the teacher wasn't quite prepared for. She playfully kicked at him, telling him to get back to morning study, but it was clear his flattery had worked and she wouldn't be pursuing the matter further. A moment later, Ms. Miller stood before the class to announce that the four-school joint exam was scheduled for tomorrow, and she would be distributing the admission ticket soon. She also mentioned the English-speaking competition, noting that since only 3 students had signed up, Luna, Sophie, and Sarah, there would be no need for a preliminary screening. To be honest, it saved everyone a lot of trouble. She told the 3 girls to start preparing and reminded the class that each group needed at least 2 performances for the New Year's Gala. Meanwhile, over at First High, the atmosphere was reaching a boiling point as rumors spread that the famous web novel had resurfaced on Second High's forum. Students whispered that a transfer student was the author, and since Marcus was the only senior to transfer recently, the connection seemed obvious. Suddenly, the chatter died down instantly because Vice Principal Miller was standing at the back door, having overheard the entire conversation. He frowned, demanding to know who had moved the novel from their forum over to Second High, leaving the students staring at each other in stunned silence. When no one spoke, Vice Principal Miller's face darkened as he called for the class monitor to step forward. The monitor, Leo, stood up with a bitter smile, admitting he had no idea who the author was or how the move happened. The vice principal was skeptical, questioning how it was possible that no one knew when he'd been told the author was a student in this very class. The classroom erupted into chaos at that revelation, with everyone wondering if it really was Marcus after all, while Vice Principal Miller stood there looking quite perplexed. He explained that their homeroom teacher, Mr. Song, had claimed to have found the student and stopped the novel to protect their grades, but the students just shook their heads. That was when Sophie stood up and dropped a bombshell. She confirmed it was Marcus, as she had heard a school official praising the work before Mr. Song hushed it up. Vice Principal Miller's expression turned grim as he told them to continue their studies before storming out of the classroom. He had heard enough, and it seemed a certain teacher had some explaining to do. The moment he was gone, the class exploded with excitement, crowding around Sophie to confirm that Marcus was indeed the author. At that same moment, Mr. Song was in the faculty office organizing papers when the vice principal marched in. The other teachers looked up in surprise as a visibly frustrated Vice Principal Miller stood at the door and summoned Mr. Song into the hallway for a private talk. He wasted no time, asking if it was true that the novel was now being updated on Second High's forum. Mr. Song broke into a cold sweat, realizing that simply banning Marcus's account hadn't stopped the boy at all. Vice Principal Miller pressed him, pointing out the discrepancy between Mr. Song's story about academic focus and the student's claim that the author was the boy who dropped out. Mr. Song could only offer an awkward, stammering laugh, but the vice principal wasn't in the mood for excuses, accusing him of intentionally hiding the truth because of their personal conflict. It was a messy situation, to say the least. He berated Mr. Song for making things difficult, asking why he couldn't have just been honest about the author's identity from the start. Now, the school's reputation was on the line, and the vice principal had no idea how to explain this to his superiors. He had already told the Education Bureau that the hiatus was for the students' studies, and with officials visiting Second High soon, the timing couldn't be worse. We see here that the rivalry between the local high schools was about to get very complicated. The schools were competing for a prestigious provincial title, and they couldn't afford a scandal. So he ordered Mr. Song to either get the novel deleted or convince Marcus to bring it back to First High. Mr. Song stood there, mouth agape, completely overwhelmed. Vice Principal Miller reminded him that his senior teacher certification was up for review this year, and if the school became a laughingstock, the consequences would be severe. He demanded a swift resolution before the news spread any further. He suggested it would have been better to claim the author was an outsider from the start, leaving Mr. Song to grit his teeth and promise that he wouldn't let the school lose face. It was a tall order, considering how things had ended with Marcus. Vice Principal Miller nodded in satisfaction, finally feeling he had made his point, before turning on his heel and walking away with his hands tucked behind his back. The students exchanged uneasy glances until Sophie finally raised her hand, offering to help, while others whispered about Sarah being a better choice since she was closer to Marcus. Mr. Song asked her to find out why the novel was no longer being updated at First High and to convince him to bring it back, but Sarah hesitated, pointing out that Marcus was a second high student now. The homeroom teacher simply smiled and urged her to try anyway, suggesting she tell him that all his old classmates were dying to read the next chapter. Later, Ryan messaged Marcus to say the teacher was sending Sarah to win him back, but Marcus just jokingly replied that he had already deleted the girl's contact info. Sure enough, a friend request from Sarah popped up a moment later, which Marcus rejected without a second thought before turning to the wealthy and adorable Luna sitting beside him. When Luna pouted that she was out of money for their Saturday movie date, Marcus laughed so hard his stomach hurt, offering to pay instead, though she insisted on using her family discount card. She sat there in a daze for 10 minutes, her mind struggling to keep up, before whispering to herself that using a family card didn't really count as her treating him. Marcus was nearly grinning at her sheer cuteness when the chemistry teacher noticed his distraction and called him out in front of the entire class. He stood up and claimed he had just discovered a secret in a chemistry equation involving barium and sodium that spelled out banana, making the whole class burst into laughter. The teacher told him to save his scientific discoveries for after class, and soon enough, the lunch bell rang, bringing Sophie scurrying over to Marcus's desk. She teased him for being heartless after Sarah complained about the rejected friend request, but Marcus coldly brushed it off and invited Luna to go grab lunch instead. Sophie was left stunned by the blatant snub, while another student, Jake, told her to let it go, suggesting Marcus simply preferred Luna's company anyway. While waiting in the cafeteria line, Marcus noticed Luna looking at him with watery eyes and asked her friend, Sophie, what could have possibly upset her so suddenly. Luna timidly asked if his ex-girlfriend back at First High was very beautiful, and when Marcus realized she was jealous, he couldn't help but let out a small chuckle. As they ate, the conversation turned to the upcoming talent show, and Sophie let it slip that Luna had actually won first place in the competition the previous year. Luna shyly tried to stop her, but Sophie proudly revealed that Luna was actually a gifted piano prodigy, a secret that left Marcus feeling quite impressed. Marcus agreed to sign up for the show, while back at First High, Sarah was telling Mr. Song that Marcus wouldn't even accept her friend request, let alone talk to her. Mr. Song was flabbergasted, insisting that as former classmates they should be on better terms, but Sarah quietly admitted that those days were long gone. He desperately suggested she offer to buy him dinner on the school's tab to make amends, but Sarah bit her lip, wondering why the teacher wouldn't just call Marcus himself. Mr. Song was momentarily stunned, his mouth hanging open as he struggled to find words, until Sarah finally mustered the courage to ask if he was simply too embarrassed to call Marcus himself, causing the teacher's face to darken instantly as he snapped at her to stop talking nonsense. He dismissed her back to class, but as soon as she left the office, Mr. Song immediately regretted his pride, slapping his forehead in frustration as he realized he had just let his only messenger walk away. After searching the school records, he found Marcus's number but couldn't bring himself to press the call button. Instead, he summoned Marcus's former deskmate, Jacob, who soon arrived and stood stiffly in the office while the teacher forced a smile. Mr. Song asked if Jacob was still on good terms with Marcus, suggesting he convince the boy to stop posting his novel at Second High and either return to First High's forum or wait until after the college entrance exams, shamelessly claiming he was only worried about the boy's grades. Jacob, playing dumb, pointed out that since Marcus had already transferred, his grades shouldn't be the teacher's concern anymore, and besides, writing for First High would be just as distracting as writing for Second High. Mr. Song cleared his throat awkwardly, insisting it was different and pleading for help, to which Jacob replied that he would love to assist, but there was a slight problem, a but that made the teacher's eyes light up with hope. Jacob scratched his head and admitted he owed Marcus some money, making it too awkward to reach out, but Mr. Song waved it off generously, offering to pay the debt himself if it meant getting Marcus back on their side. Knowing his promotion to senior teacher depended on the school's reputation, Mr. Song insisted on paying, telling Jacob that it was the least he could do since he was asking for a favor, and then asked exactly how much was owed. The homeroom teacher, Marcus, gritted his teeth and offered to cover the $400 himself. He asked the girl to tell Leo that it would be best, truly for the best, if he waited until after the college entrance exams to finish his novel. Even though Leo had already transferred schools, Marcus still worried that he was throwing his future away. Jacob struggled to hide a grin while telling the teacher he couldn't guarantee success, and perhaps he should just wait until he had his own money to pay Marcus back. But Mr. Song was already reaching for his phone. The teacher pulled out his phone to scan Jacob's code, insisting he take the money as long as he put his heart into persuading Marcus, all while maintaining the facade that this was strictly about protecting a student's academic career. Jacob thanked him and promised to try, and once the $400 hit his account, he hurried out of the office, immediately sending Marcus a message once he was safely out of earshot. He told Marcus he had just made a killing, laughing about how Mr. Song was so desperate he paid $400 to stop the novel, which only made Marcus smirk and decide to post a new chapter that night just to celebrate. That evening, while everyone else was cramming for the four-school joint mock exam, we see Marcus researching how to register an online shop, remembering that a massive e-commerce wave was about to hit the market in a few years. He knew he wasn't the very first to the party, but he was early enough to catch the peak of the trend before it crushed traditional retail, and rather than building a long-term brand, he aimed for a quick profit in a niche market. He decided on a rather unconventional industry, selling specialty lingerie, and since he had recently turned 18, he finally met the legal requirements to open his own digital storefront without needing a guardian's help. Suddenly, a message from Jacob popped up asking if Marcus had been hacked, because in Jacob's mind, Marcus was a straight-laced science prodigy who would never, under any circumstances, be associated with such provocative products. Marcus laughed it off and explained his business plan, even sending over some product photos to get Jacob's opinion on the inventory, since he didn't have many friends he could trust with such a unique secret. By 10:30 that night, he had finished setting up his shop and uploading the photos, finally turning to his schoolwork for a quick review before bed, and the next morning, he arrived at the classroom just as the proctors were walking in. His friend Mike asked how he felt about the upcoming Chinese exam, and Marcus confidently replied that he expected to be at the top of the grade, only to be interrupted by a familiar, cold voice warning him that he'd better not get caught cheating. Marcus was momentarily stunned to see that the proctor was none other than Mr. Miller, the dean from First High. We soon learned that for this joint exam, teachers from the four schools were swapped to prevent any local favoritism. Mr. Miller coldly ordered everyone to put away their study materials, warning them that if he caught anyone with a cheat sheet or copying, he would confiscate their papers immediately. He noted that while he didn't know how Second High handled things, at First High, cheating meant an immediate call to one's parents, all while shooting a pointed glare at Marcus. Once the papers were distributed, Marcus began writing without a second thought. Over an hour passed in a flash, and Marcus raised his hand with a faint smile, asking if he could turn in his paper early. He glanced at the classroom clock and saw there were still 45 minutes left, seeing no reason to waste time sitting there. However, Mr. Miller gave a dry laugh and told him it was far too early. He reminded the class that according to the rules, no one could leave until 30 minutes before the end of the exam. Marcus waited until exactly that 30-minute mark to hand in his work and leave. Mr. Miller took the paper and followed him out, pulling him aside for a private chat in the hallway. Frowning, Mr. Miller asked if Marcus was truly the one writing that novel on the First High forum, remarking that he'd never heard of the boy having such a talent before. Marcus simply smiled and mentioned that he heard the Education Bureau leaders had praised his work, suggesting the dean remind them that he was now at Second High. Mr. Miller's face darkened instantly, snapping that a little praise had clearly gone to the boy's head. He lectured Marcus, saying the college entrance exam was the only thing that mattered and that wasting time on such trivial hobbies was a tragedy. Marcus calmly agreed with everything he said, which, naturally, only irritated the man further. Marcus then excused himself, joking that he needed to get back to writing since the Education Bureau leaders were likely waiting for an update. Mr. Miller was absolutely fuming as he watched the boy walk away. In a fit of pique, he pulled out his phone and sent a message to Marcus's former teacher, Mr. Song. He told Mr. Song that his former student was becoming insufferable and that the stinking novel situation needed to be handled immediately. Mr. Song replied that since Marcus refused to delete it, the school should host its own literature competition. He figured that with so many students at First High, someone was bound to be better than Marcus. Mr. Miller's eyes lit up, thinking this was a brilliant way to overshadow the boy's popularity and reclaim the school's dignity. He promised to suggest it to the principal immediately, and to be honest, First High moved with impressive speed once they had a target in sight. By the time the Chinese exam ended, the homeroom teachers had already distributed the notice about the new novel writing contest. There were gold, silver, and bronze medals promised, with the principal himself presenting the awards. The winning works would even be archived in the school library as permanent collections. Since the activity included both freshmen and sophomores, many students responded enthusiastically and began posting their own stories on the school forum. Word of this competition soon reached Marcus and his friends while they were having lunch. His friend, Leo, looked at Marcus with a mix of curiosity and amusement. Leo laughed, saying the whole situation was quite interesting, before the group shifted their conversation to the exams they had just finished. Marcus suggested they prepare for an essay topic regarding environmental governance. He had a feeling it would appear on the next test, given how often it had been in the news lately. He mentioned that recycling and environmental protection were hot topics, and Leo couldn't help but praise him, calling him a true top-tier student. Sarah, who was eating nearby, pulled out her phone and asked if everyone from First High was capable of predicting exam questions like this. Marcus chuckled, saying his predictions were usually quite accurate, though he couldn't speak for others. He then reminded Sarah not to stand him up for the movie they had planned for the next day. That afternoon, as the bells rang for the end of the science and English exams, the proctors began collecting the papers. The students stood up and stretched, exhausted after a full day of intense testing. When Marcus returned to his classroom, Leo was waiting by the door, looking as excited as if he were meeting a celebrity. Several girls nearby also began cheering as Marcus walked in, shouting that he had been right. The English essay topic had indeed been about environmental protection, exactly as Marcus had predicted. He smiled modestly, claiming it was just a bit of good luck. Sarah also returned to the room, happily telling Leo how easy the essay had been thanks to the tip. Just then, their English teacher, Ms. Lane, entered the room and announced that she wouldn't be giving them any extra homework over the weekend. She then asked if they had heard about the literature competition First High was organizing. Many students instinctively turned their heads to look at Marcus in the back row. Ms. Lane explained that Second High wouldn't be doing a writing contest. Instead, with only 100 days left until the big exam, they were forming study groups. Each group would have 4 students, ideally each specializing in a different subject so they could help one another improve. However, at that moment, Marcus raised his hand and shared a thought. He pointed out that while many schools used the 4-person study group model, the results were often disappointing. He suggested a more flexible approach where the group size wasn't fixed. He proposed a system where students could give mini lectures on their best subjects, allowing others to attend if they found the topic useful. This way, everyone could play to their strengths. After all, teaching others is often the best way to solidify one's own knowledge. He explained that students with specific weaknesses could seek out the best mini-teachers rather than being limited to their own small group. This idea was met with nods of approval all around. Leave it to a top student to hit the nail on the head. And so, Friday ended with laughter and cheers. Clearly, the arrival of the weekend had put everyone in a fantastic mood, though what happened next was quite surprising. We see Sarah, our resident hidden heiress, heading home on a public bus. It's no wonder that after graduation, her classmates were shocked to learn just how wealthy her family actually was. In the blink of an eye, Saturday morning arrived. Marcus had arranged to meet Sarah at the mall at 2 in the afternoon, and he had prepared thoroughly for this date. Not only did he buy 2 cups of milk tea, but he also picked out a delicate little bracelet as a gift. A short while later, he spotted a familiar figure. Sarah appeared wearing a simple white dress and carrying a small matching handbag. Standing at 5'4" in a pair of modest heels, she looked remarkably elegant. Although she wasn't wearing any makeup yet and hadn't learned how to style herself, the potential for her natural beauty was already quite clear. She hadn't even taken off her glasses, and this was the first time Marcus had seen her without her school uniform. Sarah asked in a shy, small voice if she looked okay, nervously fidgeting with her fingers. Marcus couldn't help but chuckle warmly at her modesty. He told her she looked lovely before handing over the milk tea and the gift. Sarah tried to decline at first, but Marcus simply pressed the box into her hands with a smile. He encouraged her to open it, mentioning that they could always exchange it if it wasn't to her liking. Sarah carefully opened the box. She froze for a moment, completely stunned by the gesture. Marcus smiled and offered to help her put it on, and before she could even react, the bracelet was already on her wrist. He then took her hand and led her into the mall. For Sarah, this was clearly a day of many firsts. It was her first time holding hands with a boy, and she shyly tried to pull away at first, but Marcus held on firmly. Eventually, she gave in and followed him obediently, her head bowed in embarrassment. They made their way to the 4th floor, which was crowded with people enjoying their Saturday at the cinema. Marcus told her to wait a moment while he grabbed the tickets, asking if she wanted any popcorn. To be honest, it was a redundant question. Sarah was already staring longingly at a child's popcorn bucket nearby. But just then, a familiar voice called out from the crowd. It was Leo, who shouted excitedly, asking what Marcus was doing there. Marcus turned to find Leo and 2 other former classmates from First High standing in line behind them. After a brief chat, Marcus returned to Sarah with popcorn and orange juice, wearing a playful grin. He told her it was time to head in, mentioning he'd just run into some old schoolmates. Sarah was instantly terrified, burying her face in her hands for fear of being recognized. Marcus found her panicked reaction absolutely adorable. It was almost enough to make him burst out laughing. In truth, while Sarah didn't use makeup, her natural features were quite striking. It was only her shy personality that made her a wallflower at school. Meanwhile, Leo and the others began teasing Marcus, and one boy even managed to snap a secret photo to post in their old class group chat. The chat exploded instantly, with students calling Marcus a player for being out with another girl when he supposedly liked Chloe. Someone even tagged Chloe, pointing out that Marcus seemed to have moved on very quickly after transferring. Chloe said nothing, but she gritted her teeth and forwarded the photo to her friend, Mia. Mia was shocked, asking where the photo was taken. She scoffed, telling Chloe that the girl in the photo was someone everyone at school used to laugh at. She couldn't believe Marcus would settle for her. Mia then went on a long rant, telling Chloe everything she knew about Marcus and Sarah. Unaware of the digital storm, Marcus and Sarah were settled into a quiet corner of the darkened theater. Marcus leaned in toward her, the flickering light of the screen reflecting in his eyes as the movie began to play.